It was late afternoon, like so many others. The sun was setting behind the old village rooftops, painting the window cracks and forgotten memories with golden light. I was on the porch, embroidering a dishcloth, as I have done ever since my hands lost their haste and my eyes learned to wait slowly. That's when she arrived, my daughter, full of life, perfumed with something new, her eyes shining. Are you curious to find out how it all happened? Then subscribe to the channel now and leave a comment telling me where you're listening to this story from. I love to know where you're following me from. And look, if I were you, I wouldn't miss what's coming up. The truth I'm about to reveal will move you in ways you can't even imagine. Are you ready? Mama, she said, I have something to tell you. In that instant, before she spoke another word, I felt my stomach tighten, as if my whole life had suddenly curled back inside this old womb of mine. Her voice was sweet, but something in it took me back in time, like the scent of stored linen or an old song. I met a man, Mama. I did not hear the rest, or I did and simply refused to believe it, because when she said his name, that name, I felt the world turn backward, a name that was not merely sound, but wound, not simply a memory, but a gash still open. A name I spent a lifetime trying to forget, trying to erase from my soul, from my skin, from my very womanhood. She called him charming. She said he was well-mannered, older, refined, that he spoke with his hands and listened with his eyes. And I listened in silence, with the cloth trembling on my lap and the embroidery unraveling, as if my hands remembered him too. I did not tell her that this man once lived in my youth, that he once filled my ears with promises scented like jasmine, then vanished, leaving nothing but absence and a name crossed out in the ledger of my hopes. I did not tell her he destroyed what was purest in me, left me alone to gather the pieces beneath my family's quiet stares and the whispers of the neighborhood. My daughter spoke sweetly, and the more she spoke, the more I sank into that chair, as if growing older with each word. He had returned, not to the village, not to ask forgiveness, but through the hands of my daughter, as if he owed nothing, as if a trained smile could erase the past. And I sat there, silent, my soul in quiet panic, trying to choose between screaming the truth or swallowing once more what time itself had failed to digest. That was where this tale began. In the exact moment I realized the past does not die. It merely changes its clothes and walks back in through the front door. There are names that time tries to erase, but the heart will not forget. Names no longer spoken aloud, yet still alive in the corners of one's body, tucked away like a scar beneath a clean dress. His was one of those. A short name, common enough, but to me it rang like a blow. When my daughter said his name, the room suddenly felt far too small. The air seemed to slip out through the window, and everything around us went still. The kettle hissed on the stove, but my ears heard nothing. Only his name, echoing. She spoke it with tenderness, with a gleam in her eyes, as one names her own future. And I heard it as one recognizes the voice of an old nightmare. He's different from the others, Mama, she said. He has a calm way of looking, as though he understands me with just his eyes. And I thought, I too was once looked at like that by him. It was a gaze that deceived me, that seduced me, that broke me. She went on, and each word felt like a blade reopening a wound I had buried long ago, a past I had sealed away, swallowed down, hidden in the furthest room of memory, like a chamber left to gather dust. She did not know. She could not know. And yet her innocence hurt more than the memory, for she spoke his name with love, a fresh love, new, untouched by shadow. And I knew all that lay behind that name, behind that man. For a moment, I thought of interrupting, of saying, "Daughter, this man is not who you think he is." But the words choked in my throat, because the truth carried weight, the weight of revealing what I had lived, what I had suffered, what I had cried in silence for countless nights. And more than that, the fear of seeing her look upon me with pity, or worse, with anger. So I said nothing. I feigned surprise, feigned joy. I pretended it did not ache to hear that name spoken so gently, as though he were just any man, as though he had not once been the one who shattered my youth. From that day on, I watched my daughter differently. She moved lightly, full of plans and laughter. And I lived between a bleeding past and a present that demanded silence. It was then I understood, when an old pain returns through the mouth of the one you love most, it becomes something else, more cruel, more piercing, and his name, spoken by her, became another voice inside me, a voice that whispered, "You have not yet healed, and perhaps you never shall." I was still a young girl then, the kind who carries more dreams in her eyes than certainties in her hands. My hair was long, my feet restless, and I had a stubborn hunger for happiness. Life was small, yes, but it seemed full of promise. A sunny Sunday or a flower blooming by the wall was enough to make me believe that anything was possible. It was in those days that he appeared. He came as though by chance, not seeking anything, and yet, little by little, he made himself a presence, first with lingering glances, then with sweet words, and finally with a quiet comfort. I let myself be carried away, dizzy with enchantment, drunk on that foolish joy only young girls in love know. He was older, and I was naive, not ignorant, but innocent, unaware of the traps life sets before women who dare to trust. I believed that love was just as the novellas told it. I believed that when a man said you were the woman of his life, he spoke from the soul, not with an empty mouth full of false intentions. We met in secret, behind the church or by the edge of the pond, always amid laughter and promises. He said he would take me far from there, that we would build a life of our own, with a white house and a garden of daisies. And I believed him, until the day he vanished. Without warning, he left the village, left my life, left my body. He gave no letter, no farewell, no reason, and what he left behind was shame. The burden of a guilt that was not mine, yet one the eyes of others laid upon my shoulders. I spent months locked in my room. Food would not go down. The mirror refused to reflect me. Inside me lived a void that only grew wider and darker. When I finally stepped outside again, I was no longer the same. The girl with eyes full of sky was gone. In her place stood a woman with lowered gaze, short steps, and a soul torn open. He took my youth without asking, took it with promises he never meant to keep, with kisses that tasted of lies, with touches that left no bruise, but left their mark. He took my innocence, my courage, my will to dream. I never loved the same again. I never trusted in the same way. And even now, when I close my eyes, I sometimes still hear his voice whispering eternal love. Little did I know that the only thing eternal was the damage. In those days, a young woman could not afford to misstep. One wrong move, and your reputation would spill like water onto the yard. And reputation, my child, was no small thing. It was worth more than health, more than education, more than a man's promise. So when he left me with a broken heart and a marked body, I told no one. I swallowed the tears. I swallowed the rage. I even swallowed my hunger. My mother looked at me with suspicion. She noticed my silence, my pale face, my absences, but she never asked. My father, he noticed nothing, and I pretended. Every single day, as if nothing had happened, as if my world had not been torn apart by his hands. I washed my soul with soap, but the filth would not come off. I slept face down, as if the weight on my back were something real, and during meals, I kept my eyes lowered. The smell of food turned my stomach. Not from pregnancy, there was no child, but because the memory of him made even the beans taste bitter. The neighbors whispered, they always do. They said I walked strangely, too quiet, dry like laundry forgotten on the line. Some even asked if I was ill, and I answered with a crooked smile and a knot in my throat. I kept everything locked inside, the love, the disillusion, the disgust, the shame. Yes, shame, not for having loved, but for having believed. For giving everything to a man who only wanted what was easy to take and easier to forget. I never spoke of it to anyone, not my mother, not my sisters, not even God. I learned early that some wounds a woman must stitch from the inside, like a tear at the hem of her dress that no one must ever see. And even after I married another man, even after I became a mother, even after life carried on, the shame remained, silent, hidden, like a letter with no sender, tucked in the bottom drawer. Because more painful than being used was having to stay quiet. and learning that, for a woman, it is almost always so. We take the blows and still have to hide the bruise. There was no quarrel, no farewell, not even a note left on the table. He simply vanished, as if he had never existed, as if I had dreamed it all, as if my body had invented that passion, that touch, that emptiness. The morning I realized he was gone, I ran to the place where he used to wait for me. I stood there, heart pounding in my ears, expecting him to appear with that crooked smile and some excuse, as always. But time passed, the sun climbed high, and he did not come. I returned home with my soul in tatters. His silence screamed inside me. It was a silence that cut deep, that tore more than harsh words ever could, because silence is cowardly. It leaves us with no chance to respond, to ask, to understand. The days that followed were like walking across a minefield. Every memory was an explosion. Every scent took me back to his arms, and each night became darker, deeper, colder. The other girls carried on with their lives, laughing by the windows, embroidering on their porches, and I was an absence with form. No one knew, but I was in mourning, mourning a man still living, and that, my child, is a grief that has no name. There were nights when I lit a candle, as if praying for a lost soul, but I did not pray for him. I prayed for myself, that God might rip that poisoned love out of me. But God, at times, falls just as silent as men. His disappearance taught me what no mother's advice ever could, that cruelty does not always arrive with shouting, that abandonment, when silent, wounds more, for it leaves us alone with questions, and not a single answer in the world. And even now, after all these years, I sometimes still wake with the feeling of waiting for an explanation, for forgiveness, for a dignified end. But it never came. It never does. Only the silence remained, and that never left. After he left, the days grew heavier. Time, once light as the breeze of a late afternoon, turned to stone. Each morning became an endless climb, rising from bed, putting on clothes, facing the eyes of others. All of it demanded a strength that only God knows where I found. I began to sew more. Stitch by stitch, thread by thread, I wove a new skin for myself. The fabric listened. The silence embraced me. And the needle pierced the cloth as if it were piercing my sorrow too. No one saw. No one asked. And I said nothing. I learned to be quiet, to smile out of politeness, to say, "I'm fine," even as the world inside me shattered into sharp, silent fragments. I became part of the furniture of the house. I performed my duties with the precision of someone who knows she can no longer afford a mistake. I cooked, I washed, I went to Mass on Sundays, and within me, each task was a patch sewn over the emptiness he had left behind. The neighbors soon forgot. People always forget quickly what doesn't bleed in front of them. But I didn't forget, nor did I want to, for forgetting would mean it was all for nothing, and I needed it to have meant something, even if only the lesson of never again giving one's soul for a pretty smile. The years passed like uninvited guests. I aged more inside than out. While my friends married, I held back. Each suitor's gaze startled me, like a ghost, a disguised memory, until one day I accepted a man's offer, not out of love, but out of fear, the fear of growing old alone. And even after marriage, even with children, with routine, with a table set and beds changed, the wound remained, silent, stubborn, like a scar that does not fade no matter how many years go by. I stitched my pain from within, and that, my child, is how I survived. I never thought I would see him again. I believed that time, with its way of sweeping all things beneath the rug of life, had erased him from the world, not just from my memory, but fate, that old mocker, delights in cruel ironies. And so it was on an ordinary day, in a plain dress and with the sun hot upon my brow, that our paths crossed once more. It was at the market. I was on my way to buy pumpkin for lunch, lost in thought about spices, when I heard that voice. It was not just any voice. It was his, that same low tone, the slow drawl, as if he always held something back between his teeth. My heart leapt to my face. My legs nearly gave out, but I stood firm. I pretended it was nothing, turned my head, but he saw. And when our eyes met, it was as though time spat back everything I had tried to bury. He smiled, a gentle smile, the kind that fools even mirrors, and he said my name, as if it still belonged on his tongue, as if the years had not passed, as if he had not left me without explanation, without ground beneath my feet, without breath in my chest. "How are you?" he asked, like one who greets an old acquaintance. And I, who had so much to say, could only reply with a dry, "I'm well," as rough as the throat swallowing my fury. He said he was passing through, that life had pulled him far away, that he had chased after work, that he hadn't written because he thought I would hate him. And there, in the middle of the market, amid the scent of coriander and the shouting of vendors, he tried to offer me a rewritten version of history. But I did not accept, because it wasn't coincidence. It was audacity. Fate showed me that he had gone on, whole, sharp-tongued, with a memory conveniently short, and I was still there, sewn, patched, still bleeding from within. That reunion was brief, but eternal. Not for all he said, but for all I did not, and never will. I had already convinced myself that the reunion had been nothing more than one of fate's cruel tricks, painful, yes, but passing. I believed he would go away again, that time would erase him once more. But he did not. He stayed. He stayed and took root with hands that once tore mine away. It was on a Sunday, under a clear sky, that she told me. We sat at the table, as we always did, fresh coffee, bread warmed on the stove, and that quiet ease that sometimes lives between mother and daughter, until she took a deep breath and said, "Mama, he asked me to marry him." My hand froze in midair, the knife never touched the bread, and my heart seemed to slide right off the chair. I thought I had misheard, but her eyes confirmed the sentence. She spoke with a joy that ached, said he was kind, respectful, unlike the men her age, that he cared for her with gentle words and steady hands, that he looked at her as one beholds a miracle. And I only heard the sound of the world breaking inside me. I could not react. I smiled, a rehearsed smile, tired, old. I said I was happy for her, that every mother dreams of seeing her daughter cherished, and inside, I was dying from each memory, dying from fear, dying from fury at fate, which now forced me to see him seated at my table, drinking the same coffee he had once spat upon my soul. She asked for my blessing, and I gave it. I gave it as one signs a certificate of silence, as one who consents not out of will, but out of love. Because a mother's love is this, swallowing the scream so as not to wound the laughter of her child. That night, I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to understand what God wanted from me. Was it punishment? Was it lesson? Or was it simply further proof that for some pains there is neither cure nor justice? My daughter was going to marry the man who had destroyed my youth. And I would have to be the godmother of that union. I never imagined silence could hurt this much. It does not tear the skin, stain the sheets, or leave bruises on the arms. But oh, how it weighs, dear Lord. Each word I did not speak was a stone upon my chest, and every time my daughter spoke of him with joy, it was as if someone pressed that burden harder still. For days, I lived between two worlds. The past, where I was a young girl and a victim, where my sorrow still smelled of jasmine and abandonment, and the present, where my daughter loved the very man who had undone me. Do I tell her, or stay silent? I asked myself each morning, each night. Each time she smiled as she spoke of the dress, the music, the guest list. Do I tell her or stay silent? I whispered in thought while folding laundry, watering plants, brewing coffee. For to tell her would be to destroy the image she held of him, to destroy the dream, the wedding, the altar, perhaps even to destroy the bond between mother and daughter. And yet, to stay silent was to allow him to go on pretending, to allow her to live beside a man who once tore me to shreds as though plucking petals for sport. The dilemma was not only mine, it belonged to my soul, to my blood, to my history. Many times I stood before her door, ready to say everything, ready to tear through the years of silence. But upon hearing her voice humming softly, or seeing the sparkle in her eyes as she showed me the details of her trousseau, the courage would melt. It became a tear, a prayer. I tried writing letters. I burned everyone. I tried speaking to God. But he too remained silent. To tell or to withhold. In the end, I chose silence, not from cowardice, but because a mother's love, when true, chooses to die in silence, so her child may live in peace. But within me, the truth remains, like a knife hidden beneath the pillow. I never imagined I would wear my finest dress to witness the greatest sorrow of my life. The dress was light blue, sleeves embroidered by my own hand. I chose it outwardly, but within, I wore mourning, not for a body's death, but for the death of my soul. The church was full, the flowers were fresh, the music gentle, and my daughter was beautiful. I had never seen her shine so. Her eyes gleamed with belief, with love, with the innocence of one who does not yet know what the world can do to an unguarded heart. I held her bouquet before she walked down the aisle. My hands trembled, but her smile was the only compass I had. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for everything, Mama." And I wanted to collapse right there. But a mother does not fall apart in front of her daughter. A mother waits for the quiet of her room, for the dark to come. He stood at the altar, dressed finely, beard trimmed, that same old gaze, the same lie, the same cowardice, and he looked at me as though he owed nothing, as though time had erased what he had once done with his own hands. The priest spoke of love, of surrender, of commitment, and each word cut me deeper, for I knew that there, before everyone, he represented the very opposite of what he now promised. And still, my daughter smiled, and still the applause came, and still the march played. I witnessed the wedding with my soul outside my body. My presence was physical. My heart was not. It was far away, hidden somewhere in the past, where I was still brave, where I was still whole. When it came time for photographs, I was called beside the bride and groom. I smiled, I posed, I performed the part. But inside, all was ash, all was ruin. I returned home with aching feet and a soul worn to shreds. That night, I lay upon clean sheets and wept until the pillow was soaked through. I wept for all that I had not wept at the altar. I wept for myself, for her, for every woman who has ever loved a man unworthy even of the ground beneath his feet. She married in joy, and I watched with an absent soul. After the wedding came the visits, at first spaced out, then more often. Sunday afternoons, Saturday lunches, weekday coffee. My home, once a refuge, became a stage. And every time he crossed that threshold, it felt as though my entire past entered behind him, uninvited. My daughter would arrive glowing. "He loves your cooking, Mama." And I would smile with my mouth, for my soul no longer knew how to express anything at all. He sat at the table as if he had always belonged in that chair, spoke with ease, called me ma'am. Occasionally, he offered a compliment. "Your cooking is still unmatched." And inside, I turned over memories of when he used that same voice to say I was beautiful, that I was everything, that he would never leave me. Yes, our eyes met, briefly, tense, heavy with history. Between us lived a silent language, a battlefield unspoken that my daughter did not know existed. Every time our eyes crossed, it was as though time itself peeked at us through the keyhole of memory. And the silences, oh, the silences. Silences between spoonfuls. Silences between stories told and laughter faked. Silences that said far more than any speech could. For it was in those empty spaces that everything became clear. The discomfort, the weight, the memory, the wound. He tried to appear at ease. Perhaps he even was. For men like him walk lightly upon the rubble they leave behind. But we, the women, we gather the shards. We sew the floor back together with our bare fingers. Sometimes my daughter would step out of the room to fetch water, dessert, anything. And then it was just the two of us. Time suspended, air thin. And in that short silence, everything that once was and everything that never would be hovered over the table. I never spoke a word, nor did he. But our silences were full of everything that remained from what had once almost been love. Pain changes form when it no longer belongs to us alone. And that day, when I saw my daughter with red eyes sitting on the edge of my bed, her shoulders slumped like a flower forgotten in a vase, I understood that my silence had, in some way, reached her too. She entered without knocking. It was night. I was already in my nightgown, brushing the thinning strands of my hair. When I looked up, there she was, shallow eyes, trembling lips, empty hands. She carried no anger, no answers, only sorrow, the kind that does not scream. the kind that drips slowly, like a gentle rain. She sat without saying a word. I did not ask. A mother knows when a question wounds more than silence. We sat there side by side for long minutes until she finally spoke. He lied to me, Mama, and that was enough. She did not ask for advice. She did not seek explanation. She only needed to say it aloud. She needed someone to listen, without judgment, without surprise, without saying, I told you so. She cried as I once cried, lying alone in the dark with the bitter taste of disappointment stuck in my throat. And I, within myself, cried too, but not for his lie, for her, because now the pain belonged to her, because now she knew that even the prettiest eyes can lie, that even men who say they love can wound, that even wide smiles can hide sharp knives. I wanted to say everything, to tell her that I had once sat in that same place, on that same invisible chair where the heart becomes rags and the soul curls inward. But I stayed silent, for that was not a time for the past. It was a time for holding. I embraced my daughter with what strength I had left, as if that embrace might stitch into her what a man had tried to tear apart. And for the first time, I felt that though silence may have spared her some pain, it had also denied her preparation. Her pain was mine, and once again, not mine. There are silences that scream. There are truths that grow old inside us without ever finding a way out. My truth, the one that gnaws at me since girlhood, remains within. It lives in my bones, sewn into the flesh, hidden behind eyes, trained to hold everything in. We never spoke of him. I never told her who he had been to me. I never said that before he was her husband, he was my mistake, my wound, my sorrow. I had 1,000 chances. After the first tear, after the first lie, after the first night she slept at my house to escape his absence, and still I stayed silent. Not for lack of will, but from an excess of love. To speak would be to expose an old wound, dry but still tender. It would unravel the little she still held in her hands. It would surface a story no one else knows, one I buried with myself, and one, God willing, I shall take with me to my grave. Sometimes I think of writing it down, leaving it in a notebook tied with ribbon marked, "Read only when I am no longer here." But even that pains me, for I know the sorrow I avoided in life might reach her in death, and I do not want that, never did. My secret is a cross, not the kind worn on a chain for all to see, but a quiet one, made of choices, of omissions, of sacrifices, a cross that bends me, but one I refuse to let fall, for it is mine, mine alone. Sometimes she asks me, "Mama, do you think I chose the wrong man?" And I answer with a gentleness that hides the weight, "Child, sometimes life chooses for us, and that is the truth. Life chose silence, and I agreed to carry it." He left on an ordinary morning, no storm, no shouting, no suitcases thrown. He simply rose, gathered his things, and walked out, one step after another, like a man going to buy bread and never returning. My daughter called me that evening. Her voice was different, low, wounded, tired of holding up a castle of sand that the wind had already carried away. "Mama, he left," and I listened, just listened. I said nothing for a few seconds, as if the world itself had paused to give me back a breath of peace. He left, and I did not cry, not because there was no pain, but because there were no tears left. For all that needed weeping, I had wept years ago, alone, in the dark. That absence was already an old acquaintance to me, an emptiness with a name and a scent, now simply changing its address. My daughter wept, and I cried inside with her. But also, secretly, I felt a relief too large for words, not for vengeance, not for justice, but for closure. For some stories only cease to hurt once they end. He left dishes in the sink and promises unfinished, took his clothes, but left the silence. And the house, oh, the house, it breathed differently without him. Even the furniture seemed less tense. For days my daughter slept in my room, rested her head on my lap, as she did when she was little, and I stroked her hair as if I could pull from her, strand by strand, the pain he had planted. We did not speak ill of him, nor well. We simply let time do what it does best, pass. He left, and for the first time, I remained whole. There are pieces of advice that live in the throat but never become sound, words that linger at the lips, waiting for courage, the right moment, or just a gesture that says, "Now is the time." I had many such words, and I kept nearly all of them. I wish I had told her, early on, "Be wary of eyes that promise the world. They are often the same eyes that will look away when you need them most." But I did not, because she smiled, because she believed, and because, in that smile, there was a part of me that wanted to believe again too. I wish I had told her that true love does not hurt so deeply, that love, yes, may bring arguments, fatigue, and silence, but it should not humiliate. It should never extinguish the woman within. I wish I had explained that love is not found in promises whispered at the edge of the bed, but in gestures repeated when no one is watching, that someone who vanishes once has already shown what they're capable of, and someone who lies once may lie 10 more times, as easily as drawing breath. I often wanted to say that sometimes the heart falls in love with mirrors, not people, that there are men who reflect what we long to see but are not what they appear, and that one must look with calm, with time, with distance, to truly see what lies beneath. I wanted to speak of respect, of boundaries, of intuition, of that flutter in the stomach that is not always a butterfly. Sometimes it is a warning, but I said nothing, not from fear, but because she was not ready. Because sometimes the best advice is the one life itself gives, and her life, like mine, needed to pass through pain to understand the value of peace. Today, I look at her and I see strength. I see a woman. I see someone who understood, even without my words. But if I could have said one thing, it would have been, "Daughter, anyone who loves you will never make you feel small, and anyone who makes you small does not deserve you." It was on a winter afternoon, the kind that carries silence in the wind, that the truth finally stepped out of hiding. I was in the bedroom, folding old clothes, when she entered with a paper in her hands. She said nothing at first, sat down slowly, as though she carried more than just her own weight. Her eyes were wet, yet steady, the same way mine had once been. "Mama, is this true?" It was a letter, one of the ones I wrote but never found the courage to give her. I had hidden it between book pages, thinking time would swallow it. But time, sometimes, returns what we tried to bury. I saw in her eyes that there was no use in lying. The question wasn't about the paper. It was about me, about her, about us. I took a deep breath, sat beside her, took her trembling hand in mine, and said the only thing that needed saying, "Yes." And then the world fell silent. She did not scream. She did not weep. She simply breathed deeply, like one trying to fit inside a new truth. We sat there for long minutes, side by side, with life between us, naked, heavy, real. I told what needed telling. No drama, no embellishment. I told her who he had been to me, how it began, how it ended, and how it had stayed hidden. She listened with teary eyes, but with the strength of one who refuses to drown. At the end, she simply said, "Now everything makes sense," and she embraced me. That embrace was more than forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. It was late-born kinship. It was the closing of a circle that for so long had belonged only to me, and now, finally, was ours. She learned everything, and unlike what I feared, she did not turn away from me. She looked into my eyes and said, "Mama, thank you for bearing in silence what would have destroyed me in words." If you liked Grandma's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can hear more stories like this and share them with other people who might be inspired by this story of overcoming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a similar situation? How did you react? A kiss on the heart from all of you? And until the next story.